Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
Doing fantastic, per usual, Tim. It's great to be here. Great to have this really unique conversation coming up. There's some moments in this conversation that our listeners are going to be moved by. Really happy that we had the opportunity to speak with these two people. One is an old friend, the other is a new friend. But Tim, I'm going to stop blathering on here. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great over here, Lance. Thanks a lot for asking. Yes, I am really excited to share this conversation as well. We speak with two real powerhouses on this conversation. One is old friend Maggie Freleng, who we've worked with for years, dating back to our time investigating the Maura Murray disappearance. She's won a Pulitzer Prize, as you know. We also are speaking with Jason Flom in this conversation, who is the founding board member of the Innocence Project, and he is a force of nature himself. They both host Wrongful Conviction, the insanely popular podcast that is making real-world change with this medium.
It's incredible to know somebody like Jason Flom, who started off as the founder of Lava Records. He was in the music industry, and he moved on to Atlantic Records, Virgin Records, and now his entire mission in life is to advocate for those who have been wrongfully convicted. Check out lavaforgood.com, and you'll see the other shows that they have their hands in, including a show that we get into in depth here called Bone Valley. It's a new show. It's basically taken over the charts in podcasting, and it is an absolutely incredible story about the murder of Michelle Schofield from 1987 and her husband Leo, who was convicted for that murder and sentenced to life in prison. The show, Tim, I know you love it. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is fantastic. It is just such great journalism, and it's put together really well. So yeah, definitely listen to Bone Valley wherever you get your podcasts. After you listen to this interview, though.
And speaking of Pulitzer Prize winners, it is hosted and researched and investigated by Gilbert King, who won a Pulitzer for his book Devil in the Grove, and his research assistant, Kelsey Decker. You'll be hearing those two in Bone Valley. Also, there are moments that you need to listen to in this episode, specifically one where Jason receives a call from Paul Cortez, who is incarcerated. That comes in right after our second break, so just stick around for that conversation, and it's truly a moment that I don't know if we'll ever get again on this show.
Certainly can't recreate that naturally. So, yeah, that was definitely a moment. Hope you enjoy this interview with Maggie Freleng and Jason Flom. But before we get to that, we got to tell you about Crawlspace Premium.
We do.
Lance, what's Crawlspace Premium?
Oh my goodness, you've turned the tables on me, Tim. This is usually what you do. Well, Crawlspace Premium is a show that we do for our subscribers. Basically, you can get every episode of Crawlspace ad-free, plus our bonus show, which is a bit of a hybrid between the show that we used to do for Missing and the show we did for Crawlspace. So you get a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that goes on here at Crawlspace Media. We talk about old episodes, upcoming episodes, and then get a little bit into our personal lives a bit.
But Lance, you got to tell me where I can follow us on social media.
Well, I'm glad you asked, Tim, because all of these years of you telling me where to follow us has finally sunk in. You can go to Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod. And you want to be sure to check out the show notes on this one. Not only will we have links on where to follow Jason and Maggie, and also to check out everything that Lava for Good has going on, there'll be a link to a book that Paul Cortez wrote. He was the gentleman that called in. It's called For Treason of Innocence, and it's essentially a history on the incarceration system.
All right, we're going to cut to commercial here, and we'll be right back with Maggie Freleng and Jason Flom.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Welcome to the podcast, Maggie Freleng and Jason Flom. How are you both doing today?
Awesome.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for joining us. Of course, we know Maggie. She's always welcome on the show, but it's so good to finally get to meet you, Jason. Maggie speaks of you in such high regard that I'm a little intimidated right now. Welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
I think she's a big fan of my dog, and I'm just getting the spillover.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Exactly. Well, I'll take it.
To get it right out of the way right now, Tim did not introduce everybody appropriately. He forgot, and we're sorry, Maggie. It's Pulitzer Prize winner, Maggie Freleng.
Yes, thank you.
So huge apology there.
Thanks, Tim.
And by the way, there's a story behind that. So if you guys don't mind, I'll just tell a quick story, which is that we were in Nashville, Maggie and I. She came down to present me with an award at this thing called the Clios. And I was so excited. And the day of the award ceremony, I got a call from Maggie in a hot tub at her hotel drinking whiskey and just got a call that she won a Pulitzer Prize. And I'm like, of course you are. And B, kind of took a little air out of my balloon, but it was good. It was a good little dose of humble pie. And I was thrilled because her work is deserving of a Pulitzer. I'm just thrilled that she's part of our family now as well.
Thanks.
You two need to save some awards for other people. I mean, for Christ's sake.
I know Jason has all the awards. Jesus.
Tell me that's not the most Maggie story you ever heard, though. Come on.
It really is.
I mean, do you want to do this interview with Maggie stories? We could fill an hour.
Don't even bring up the Atlanta one.
Well, welcome to the podcast. We're very excited to speak with you both about all that you do. Obviously, you both host the Wrongful Conviction podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that podcast and Lava for Good?
You know, I started the Wrongful Conviction podcast in 2016 because I wanted to spread the word about this cause that has become part of my DNA, pun intended, I guess. But I'd been working on criminal justice reform 24 years. Wrongful convictions had become a real central focus for me. I was the original board member at the Innocence Project, so known as the founding board member, not the founder. The founders are Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld. I never want to get any confusion there. But I thought if we could change hearts and minds by telling these extremely real, quintessentially human stories of tragedy and triumph, ultimately triumph, although many of them there's no triumph yet, but we're trying to help affect that outcome of people who were, framed or forced into false confessions or were victimized by junk science or other false identifications or mistaken, as well as, of course, police and prosecutorial misconduct, then we could hopefully change the narrative and give people a better understanding of how the system actually functions so that when they end up on juries, and I hope that your listeners will serve on juries when they're called to, they will have an educated and hopefully skeptical view of what's being presented to them when someone's very life is at stake. Death penalty, life in prison, whatever they're facing. I think we need to overcome our inherent biases that the person must be guilty because otherwise they wouldn't be sitting in that defendant's chair. And all these people are saying bad things about them. And these are people that I've grown up trusting and they're wearing uniforms or they're wearing suits and ties. We need to really remember that reasonable doubt is the standard, and you have to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. And again, innocent until proven guilty. So I wanted to put those principles into practice and again, influence hearts and minds to help prevent future wrongful convictions from happening. And the stories, one after another, are absolutely fucking insane. They blow my mind, and I've heard a lot of them.
Well said. And both you and Maggie have that same mission. And you just said something that was really interesting to me. You said that they have to approach it with a level of skepticism.
I absolutely feel that way. I think, research shows that the overwhelming majority of people, if they see someone in the defendant's chair or box, whatever it is, they assume that that person must be guilty. Because otherwise, why would they be here? And all these people doing all this work in this ornate courtroom or whatever the hell it is, right? I mean, Maggie can speak to that. I mean, she's got her behavioral psychology chops, and we see it day in and day out. So yeah, we want people to be more skeptical and be more determined to get to the truth, not just to accept things that are being foisted on them by people who may have ulterior motives.
Can each of you tell the listeners what your approach is in communicating that message to people who don't have that skepticism without sounding like you're being like very heavy-handed? Like you want to make sure people hear you. Do you each have a separate approach to that?
My approach has always been, these are stories of people, of humans. So my approach has always been, I'm somebody that grew up in metropolitan New York City. I don't think I have anything in common with somebody in Mobile, Alabama. But my approach is to say, yeah, we're all humans. And so I just try to tell these stories of people and make them relatable down to where were you born? Where'd you grow up? What was your childhood like? We all had that in our lives. We are all at our core people. And so that's what I really, really try to do. And then once you understand that this person is a person and not just some, vessel, somebody that's, in the political sphere now or the news media. This is an actual human. They have parents, they have siblings, they have a family, they had a dog growing up. They really liked AC/DC growing up. I think that helps us relate more and understand this could have been me or my brother. And that helps people see more clearly.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I say it as often as I can. If you don't think this can happen to you, this can happen to you. In listening to these stories of these innocent people who are languishing either on death row, as many of the people that we cover, Rob Will, Rodney Reed, Melissa Lucio, Richard Glossip, Julius Jones, and people that are sentenced to death for crimes they clearly not only did not commit, but could not have committed, right? We have cases of people who were someone who was in a foreign country when the double murder happened. Another, Nelson Serrano, was on death row in Florida for a quadruple homicide that happened in Central Florida when he was in Atlanta. You sit there and go, how could this be? But it can be because all the power is on one side, right? The government has all the power and all the resources. And once they zero in on somebody and they get tunnel vision setting in and they have these, again, they want to get a conviction. The community is outraged. It's a high profile crime. The media is all over it. There's pressure from their bosses. There's the saying, a body for a body. They got a dead body. They need to get somebody. And too often they play fast and loose with the rules. Oftentimes they make mistakes and other times they do it deliberately. That's not a system that works for any of us. And of course, it's also important to recognize that every time one of these brutal crimes is committed and they put the wrong person in prison, the right person remains free, perpetrates other awful acts against other people who should never have known that fate.
Working on wrongful convictions seems like such a heavy topic. Not one mystery usually, it's usually several. And if it's a murder case, then there would be another murderer out there. So there's automatically that mystery. But you were talking about the government as well, and they're standing in your way for truth pretty much every time as well. I just feel like just to even start looking into a wrongful conviction case, you're buried by these forces against you. Why and how can you make a difference with your show?
It's a great question. And the answer is we're seeing time and again with our show and others that by shining a light on these cases, we know that people in positions of power listen to wrongful conviction. We've heard that. It's inspired legislative changes in at least 3 states where we know that politicians have come forward and said that this was the show that inspired them to want to take action that made the system a little bit fairer and better. Washington State, Indiana, and Illinois. But also there have been cases like Ronnie Long, Lamont McIntyre. Lamont called me from the courthouse steps when he was freed after 23 years in Kansas City and said that his legal team had told him that the podcast helped to open the door for him to literally walk out of prison serving a life sentence, innocent as could be. Melissa Lucio, another one where, we were the first platform that brought her case to light. There were obviously lawyers and others working for her diligently. I want to take nothing away from that. But sometimes it takes shining a spotlight on these cases, as Maggie has done so effectively, in order to get people to act. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. Bone Valley, we're hoping, is going to have the same result, where you have a man named Leo Schofield who's been in prison for, I think it's 36 years now. Bone Valley, when you listen to this podcast, and I hope people will, many people already have, because it's on the top of the charts, which we're very grateful for. But I defy anyone to listen to this podcast and not come away outraged at what has been done by the state of Florida in this case. And it's deep. Every episode's like another layer of an onion. And you just sit there and go, I can't fucking believe this. Kind of like when you watch Making a Murderer and you watch them frame Brendan Dassey. It's like, I wanted to jump through the screen and strangle somebody. And when listening to Bone Valley, I want to jump through my phone and grab somebody and shake them and go, come on, when is enough?
Maggie, you're nodding pretty aggressively. What's your feelings on this?
It is crazy. And it's like you said, like this is what we do. This is what we live and breathe. And then when I listened to Bone Valley, it was like, I never think I can be shocked. And then I'm just shocked again at the egregiousness of the way the prosecution knowingly wrongfully convicted somebody, has somebody admitting to doing this crime. His evidence is in the car while the other person's is not. And they're still hell-bent on keeping this conviction. It's incredible. It's truly incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And it's an outstanding achievement in podcasting. So congratulations. How did this story come to you and how did you begin producing this?
Gilbert King won a Pulitzer Prize for his incredible book, Devil in the Grove, that led to the posthumous exoneration of 4 young Black teenagers who were executed by the state of Florida for raping a white woman, a crime they had no knowledge of and had nothing to do with. And his work is legendary in the space. He came to me, I don't know if it was less than 2 years ago, and told me about this case that he had been researching for 3.5 years, ever since he was approached by a judge who asked him to look into this case, which, as he says, I get approached all the time. We all do, about people who want attention brought to their cases. He says, but I've never been approached by a sitting judge. Maybe you can even play the clip during your podcast, the opening of Bone Valley.
You've been around the system for a long time. Could you ever imagine the day where you'd sit at a table with a microphone and vouch for a man who says he's not guilty?
No. In fact, I've stated many times I'm probably way over my skis right now. Technically, I'm not supposed to be doing this. But it's like, if I don't do it, who the fuck's gonna do it?
This is Judge Scott Cupp. He isn't supposed to make any public comments on pending cases. At all. Florida's Code of Judicial Conduct prohibits it. And yet, that's exactly what he's doing. To me, a writer. This could cost him not only a seat on the 20th Circuit Court, he could even be disbarred.
I just can't let it go.
And this judge is risking, you'll hear in very real terms, he's risking his job and his law license. He can be disbarred for just taking the action that he took, speaking out on the podcast about this case. And he's decided that justice is more important to him than those very real important aspects of his life. I mean, his livelihood and his reputation. He's putting it all on the line because he knows this guy's innocent and he won't back down. So that's how it opens, and it's super powerful. But Gilbert brought it to me. It was a no-brainer for me. Like, as soon as I was like, Gilbert King, I get to work with Gilbert King? Like, are you kidding me? What was that in Wayne's World? I'm not worthy. I was thrilled to be able to help him put this together in the format that it ended up in. I love everything about this show, except for the fact that Leo is still in prison. But we're hoping that this will be the year that he comes home. He has a parole hearing in March. We're optimistic. He's still, it wouldn't be a full exoneration, which is what he deserves, that and so much more. I mean, how do you compensate somebody for 36 years of their life spent in the hell of maximum security prisons in Florida? But we're really hoping that the attention that we've been able to bring will be a factor in his walking out the prison gates in March. And if he does, I'll be there to celebrate.
I can't imagine coming out of prison after being incarcerated for so long and then seeing what the world is, that you're only hearing from the inside. What, if anything, can you tell people as you're doing these productions how to prepare for something like that?
You know, it's really difficult because some of the things that you think wouldn't be an issue are an issue. Like the Suave, for example, you eat with spoons in prison. You don't have forks and knives. So Suave didn't know how to use a fork and a knife. Something so basic he hadn't done in 31 years. There's so many things that people need to prepare themselves for. But really the main thing, prison doesn't prepare you for anything. Our system is set up to punish and not reform. Most places, if you are doing life without parole, if you're a lifer, if you're on death row, if you're not getting out, they don't give you anything. You're not allowed to take classes. You basically go to sleep, work, go to sleep, work. That's all you do. And as we know, a lot of times people do get out. Suave got out. He was not supposed to leave prison unless he was in a pine box. That's how he was supposed to leave prison. And he got out. And he was given no resources except for the ones that he found for himself. Just to go back to your question, how do you prepare somebody to get out? Well, one, we're not doing it in prison where they should be prepared to get out. So it is left to us family members to try and figure it out. And that's a really difficult thing. I mean, dating. Again, going back to Suave, he didn't know how to date. He dates the wrong woman and she puts him back in prison over a lie because she knew she could take advantage of his parole. I mean, there are so many things from using forks and knives to dating. How do you even tackle all of that?
Yeah. And if I could just pick up on that for a second, it's also true that in this country, we should be building ramps for people who come out of prison, right? We should be creating a way for them to reintegrate into the community, guilty or innocent, but especially innocent. Ironically, if you're innocent, you get even less than you do if you're guilty. If you're guilty, you get access to a probation officer who, in theory, at least is there to help you try to navigate this world that has changed so much while you've been gone, and help you with basic needs like how to write a resume or housing or whatever, things that are like we take for granted. But coming home after decades in prison are far from it. We give exonerees nothing. And I get asked all the time, tell me this person got compensated. Tell me. The two questions I always get asked are, tell me the person got compensated, and tell me something happened to the prosecutor who framed them in the cases where they were framed. And the answer to that is almost no and no. No one gets anything walking out the gates as they should, not even a little care package, right? They walk out with their T-shirts and whatever they can carry in a little plastic bag. Even in the cases, which is way less than half of the wrongful conviction cases where people have been proven innocent, do they actually get compensation? Something the Innocence Project and other organizations are working on changing around the country to pass laws that will provide compensation. But even then, they have to wait years.
I was going to say, it still takes years. You don't walk out of prison and suddenly have millions. It takes a very long time.
And then there's Vincent Simmons, right? Vincent Simmons was another case that we shined a spotlight on. Vincent served 44 years and 9 months in prison in Louisiana for a crime that never happened. So he went to prison in 1977, May of 1977. He was freed in February of last year. It was in some part due to the exposure that we were able to give his case. And then CBS ran with it. And then on CBS, the two, now they're women, but they were young girls who falsely accused him, a guy they never met, of raping him. They never met him. They never knew who he was. It's abundantly obvious. And they effectively admitted this on CBS. So I asked Vincent, after 44 years and 9 months in Angola Penitentiary, one of the worst prisons in the world, which is in the middle of nowhere in Louisiana. I said, when they freed you, did they give you anything? He goes, yeah, they gave me $10. I said, cash? He goes, no, a debit card. I was like, holy shit, right? They gave him a debit card for $10. Now, fortunately, his attorney was there to pick him up, take him to get something to eat. He has family. It's a miracle he still has family left. But this is what we do. We free people, and we expect that they're just going to go figure it out, right? With $10. In some places, it's $40. Some places it's a check. They drop them off at the bus stop. What are they supposed to do? And then we're like, oh, look, there's some recidivism. Recidivism is overblown as a concept. It's not the menace that everybody makes it out to be in the media. But it would be relatively simple for us to address this problem if we just wanted to.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
How do you think it should be addressed best, I guess?
Not wrongfully incarcerating people to begin with.
That would be good. Maggie for president. Can you be the Speaker of the House, Mag? That would be great.
We really just need to start at the root of the problem. And a lot of that is policing. A lot of that is prosecutors. And a lot of that comes down to voting. We elect these people into office who prosecute people and convict people. So as we know, prosecutors can lie to people. We've seen that with Brendan Dassey. And so electing people who are honest and want the truth and are not like, what's that piece of shit in Florida's name that convicted Leo?
Aguero, John Aguero.
John Aguero. Trash. He's dead. He can't sue me. People like that. Somebody elected him into office. We need to do better. We need to start from the beginning and do better.
It's pretty mind-blowing as you lay out in Bone Valley, the corruption that helped assist keeping Leo Schofield behind bars for so long. It's really a wild case with a lot of mysteries, too. Can you, I guess, just tell us a little bit about what happened in that case?
So Michelle Schofield, rest in peace, was an 18-year-old teenage girl married to Leo Schofield. Leo was an aspiring rock star. And when she didn't show up to pick him up from band practice, pretty good alibi, by the way, he was at band practice with numerous other guys, they became more and more concerned. And Leo ultimately called the cops. A search was mounted. Eventually, her car was found on the side of a road, sort of a remote area. And then a search team searched the area, and her body was found some distance away from where the car had broken down. The person who murdered her, which now everybody knows who it is. He's confessed. His name is Jeremy Scott, a hyper-violent guy who had an incredibly long rap sheet from the time he was 11 years old. Violent crime after violent crime. So her body was found in the swamp, and the prosecutor decided he would pin it on either Leo or Leo's father. He didn't really care which one. And he actually threatened Leo that if he didn't take the fall, he was going to blame his father for it. His father was the one who found the body. And things went downhill from there. The court proceedings. Did anybody see My Cousin Vinny? Because this is worse. It's a mockery of a trial. Ultimately, Leo's convicted and fortunately was not sentenced to death, but could have been, received life in prison. And that's where he's been ever since, like I said, for these 36 long years, in spite of the fact that, as you learn in the podcast, and there's so much more to it, so I'm not giving away even a tiny fraction of the tip of the iceberg, but in the podcast, you learn that the actual killer's fingerprints were found in the car almost 2 decades ago. And there's so much other evidence connecting him. He also was a guy who lived right nearby, was suspected in another murder that happened before Michelle's murder. So the same cops had arrested him for this other murder and didn't bother to didn't even bother to interview him or test anything related to him. And he went on to murder at least 2 other people, as we prove in the podcast along the way, as Gilbert proves with his brilliant associate, Kelsey Decker. So the story is so freaking deep in everything that it says about our system and the journalism. I mean, Gilbert's got a great voice for radio anyway, as does Kelsey, but they go down and they actually interviewed Jeremy, and he confesses on the podcast in real time, in details that only the killer could know. And yet there Leo sits, the head of the church choir in prison, a guy who is admired by virtually everybody in the facility, including the guards, the warden, the other incarcerated men who he's had such a positive impact on. He's got a beautiful family, a wonderful wife and daughter who would welcome him home to the community. He's exactly zero threat to anyone. And yet the state of Florida is working overtime to try to keep him in prison for the crime that by now, and I believe they knew at the very beginning, he had absolutely nothing to do with, no knowledge of, and would actually have given probably his own life to save hers, because that's the type of guy that he is.
The details that you just explained, and Tim saying about the corruption and the work that the two of you do, and you see this corruption in every single one of these cases, in every single one of these stories, it brings back this question that I can't wrap my head around. I've been trying to do this for a long time, trying to figure out where that corruption starts. I know there's money, I know there's power, but it feels to me, because some of these stories are so easy to fix, when you have someone who's confessed, when you have fingerprints, when you have DNA match, and they still won't do anything about it, doesn't it just feel like more work to be corrupt? If they're putting the work in to be corrupt, why can't people put the work in to just do the right thing? What's your thoughts on that? I have no answer. I've been trying to wrap my head around it.
I don't really have an answer either, because you have to get into the mind of a deeply inhumane, probably psychopathic person. And I don't have that brain. I have no idea. Obviously, Jason and I are doing this work because we are not like that.
Yeah. And hopefully that, when people listen to our podcast, Wrongful Conviction and Bone Valley and others that we're working on, they'll get a perspective on that, right? And we'll make it a little bit more difficult for these people like this John Aguero piece of shit, because I'm going to call him what he was. This is a guy, by the way, who wore an electric chair tie clasp.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
It was him or one of his contemporaries who said, he said, anyone can convict a guilty person. It takes real skill to convict an innocent one. And I don't remember if that was a quote attributed to him or not, but I think that it's something that he would sign off on. Look, I mean, if this podcast does nothing else, unfortunately it has, it's led to legislative changes. It's led to people walking out the prison gates, been a part of some really dramatic and special outcomes. But I always say the best cases are the ones we'll never know about, where we make it harder for people, those psychopathic people that Maggie was referring to inflict this type of damage on these individuals and on society by creating a more educated pool of jurors who will go in appropriately skeptical, better educated. We just passed 40 million downloads on the podcast. So it's got to be true that somebody somewhere is in a jury room now who's heard the podcast, who might otherwise have voted guilty, but is now sitting there going, wait, this sounds like the same dirty tricks I heard in the Marty Tankleff case, or the Johnny Hincapie case, or the Lorenzo Johnson case. And so that's how I'm able to sleep at night in spite of all this heaviness, is that I know that somehow, somewhere, we're helping to prevent this horrible outcome from happening. Here's somebody innocent on the phone right now calling me from Sing Sing.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
You want to hear this? Let me see who it is.
This is a prepaid collect call from an incarcerated individual at New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. This call is
I think it's Paul Cortez.
and monitoring. Preventing suicide is important.
But we have
If you
several
have
innocent
concerns
people in
during
Sing
this
Sing that
call,
call me
please
on the
contact
regular,
the
so
individual's
it could be
facility to communicate with them.
could be
To
Gary
accept
Benz.
charges, press 1. To refuse charges, thank you for using.
I'm just going to say hello.
You may start the conversation now.
Hello?
Hey, hi.
Hey, Paul, I'm actually recording a podcast right now. You're on the air. This is Paul Cortez. He's an innocent man in Sing Sing for 17 years now. So we're doing the Crawlspace podcast. You're on it right now, but we've got to go because we're going to talk about other things. But I wanted to shine a light on your case since you're on the phone anyway.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Jason has been an amazing advocate for the wrongfully convicted. And I just hope the case that's being highlighted currently gets the attention it deserves. There are a lot of us who definitely need your help and your assistance in becoming free, because it takes really an army for the wrongfully convicted to basically regain their innocence and regain their freedom. So,
That's what we were just talking about. Paul, I'm going to have to cut you off because we got to get back on the mic.
Oh,
here,
it's really okay.
Oh,
This
okay.
is-
I didn't
this is
want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. This is remarkable.
Because this is not
It's,
my podcast, Paul. This is their podcast.
No, it's
This is
fine.
the Crawlspace podcast. So, okay, and I'm not going to cut you off then. Okay, so Paul, in that case, do you want to give the capsule summary of your case, which has been covered on the Wrongful Conviction podcast, and we're hoping that this year will be the year that Paul walks free.
yeah, well, basically I was wrongfully convicted in 2005, and basically it was a murder of one of my ex-girlfriends, Catherine Woods, and she was a beautiful person and beautiful friend, and she was murdered, and the police basically just through desperation and political pressure and media pressure just needed to close the case, and they thought that the Puerto Rican kid from the Bronx was a good fit for their narrative, and they picked me as the person to target, despite the lack of evidence of me even being around in the area at the time, which I wasn't. So fast forward about 15 years after being wrongfully convicted and incarcerated, we find a videotape that definitively proves that I was not in the area, and the original suspect of the crime was, which was Catherine's ex-boyfriend. So he's seen walking out of the apartment about 13 minutes after the commission of the crime. And now we're moving forward today with the Wrongful Conviction Integrity Unit of Manhattan to try to overturn the case and show that that I've been innocent all along, as I said I have been.
And Paul is first member of his family to go to college, was captain of the sports teams, was making his way as an actor and singer in New York City at the time this happened, never been in trouble, has had a spotless record in prison, is getting his master's in theology now as well, and is and also before we let you go, Paul, talk about you. He just released a book, his second book, which I'm reading. I think it's fucking great. So Paul doesn't curse, but I do. So Paul, just let's put in a plug for your book real quick.
Well, thank you very much. I just completed the master's degree in urban ministry. The book is called For Treason of Innocence, and it came through my studies for this master's degree. And the subtitle for the book is A Treatise on the Liberation Theology of the Incarcerated, Liberative Justice, and Carceral Abolition. And basically it touches those three main topics in the book. It gives a history of how the current prison industrial complex came to be through the slave system, and gives an alternative to this current punitive justice system that we now face, which basically has no kind of moral setting, which is very broken, which is very corrupt. And so in the book, I just try to offer different ideas of a new way to approach the criminal legal system so that it's more equitable and doesn't put the wrongfully convicted in prison, and it doesn't focus primarily on Black and brown citizens of whatever state it may be.
So the book is it's called For Treason of Innocence, and it's by Paul Cortez with a Z on the end. Yeah, listen, if I'm learning stuff, I've been doing this work for 30 years and I'm learning a lot reading the book. And it also reads well. It's fun to read. If you got the idea that this is some textbook, it's not. It's a powerful treatise and it's fun to read. So I recommend it. Maybe we could put the link in the show bio or something like that. That would be great. So, and check out Paul's episode of Wrongful Conviction. It's a really powerful episode. There's so much wrong with his case. And this is a New York City case, it's a Manhattan case, high profile, front page of all the newspapers. And, his attorney was under investigation by the same DA's office that prosecuted Paul for smuggling drugs into Rikers Island. At the time, his attorney didn't show up for the first 3 days of the trial. Like, it just gets worse and worse. The more you peel back the layers of the onion and you go, how is this happening right here? This is not Manhattan, Kansas. This is Manhattan, New York City. And yet this stuff goes on. It goes on everywhere. So that's, I think, the important point to bring up. So, all right. Well, do you guys have any questions for Paul, or should we let him go?
How long has he been incarcerated? So the crime happened in 2005?
Yeah. So the crime, they were just asking Paul, the crime happened in 2005?
Right. Yeah.
So he's been locked up, almost 18 years.
Yeah. 17 will be in 17 years was December 19th is when I was locked up on December 19th of last year. So yeah, moving into the 18th year now.
But this is the year we're bringing him home. We think, I mean, listen, knock wood, but there's a lot of positive momentum and we have good people. The Manhattan DA is a serious and dedicated guy who believes in justice. He's got a fantastic team and they're focused on this case. And we hope that the evidence that will lead to Paul's full exoneration, that's the goal.
And I just have one more question for Paul. What was the reason for him calling you today?
Oh, Paul, they're just asking, what is the reason for you calling me today?
Oh, well, my initial reason was to see if I was going to see you tomorrow because Jason is so dedicated to all the people that he fights for that he actually takes the time out of his super busy schedule to come up to prison to visit us. And he was intimating to me earlier this week that he might be able to drop by tomorrow morning. And I just wanted to be ready for him if he was going to. So.
Yeah, but I think it's actually going to be this weekend because I've got to do I can't move my appointment tomorrow morning. So I'm just going to come on the weekend and take my chances with the crowds. But Paul, I guess I'll talk to you later today or tomorrow. We'll figure out the timing and stuff.
All right, Jason. Thank you so much again. And please, everyone, visit the episode 242 of the podcast, which has my case and can give you some more information on it. And please just support Jason and his mission in any way you can, because this problem is nationwide. It's not just in New York City. It's not just in the state of New York. It's all 50 states have this same problem. So I thank you for your time and God bless. And hopefully I'll speak to you soon.
All right. I'll talk to you later, Paul.
Okay. Bye.
Wow. That was pretty remarkable. Thank you for letting us see that.
Something really interesting is he mentioned that his case is now going to the conviction review unit in Manhattan. And I want to point out that Alvin Bragg is the new district attorney in Manhattan who was elected, and he is a progressive district attorney who now we have finally a conviction review unit. So that is all to say, vote in people who will make conviction review units to actually try and figure out, we have innocent people in prison. We need to get them out.
Amen.
Isn't it sad, though, that it has to be a progressive, that it can't be somebody who just sees what the thing should be?
And by the way, I wouldn't even necessarily use that word. That word has been corrupted, right? It's like
right.
Alvin is a fair prosecutor. He was a federal prosecutor. He's a very serious guy, right? He's a guy who prosecuted Trump. He's one of the only people that prosecuted him successfully back in the day. But he was a guy who, even when he served as a prosecutor, was respected by both sides. He's a Harvard squared guy, right? Harvard and Harvard Law School. Was a victim of police brutality himself, growing up as a young black man in Manhattan 3 times. And as a guy who has taken this job and takes it extremely seriously, but also, he's out to make us all safe, but he's also recognizes that these wrongful convictions happened in New York for years and they were never addressed. We have a terrible record, just like Florida. It's been, I think, the last dozen years, maybe one person has been exonerated by what, they had a unit, but nothing was being done. And then you look at like Ken Thompson when he was the DA in Brooklyn, who freed 17 people in his first term, or different conviction review units around the country that have been taking on these cases with an extremely serious, eye, right? They're not trying to free people who are guilty. They're trying to free people who are actually innocent. And of course, I think that a prosecutor who's a fair-minded prosecutor should also be looking at cases of people who were over-sentenced. That's a scourge in this country as well.
We spoke a little bit earlier about how there's forces at play, and some of these people could be psychopathic, who are seemingly just fighting for this innocent person, someone that they probably know is innocent, fighting for them to stay in prison. Are there patterns that you've noticed in covering all these wrongful convictions, whether it's personality type on people like that or tactics used? Are there similarities or patterns that you've seen?
Oh, yeah. The tactics used. I mean, I wouldn't be able to say any similarities or patterns with the actual prosecutors themselves. I don't really know much about them. For sure, tactics used: coercion, lying, getting false confessions, making up evidence, perfectly legal. It's all contributing factors to wrongful convictions.
Yeah, and I think the lying thing, I'm glad that Maggie brought that up because it should be known by everyone. First of all, if you get picked up and brought in for questioning, I don't care if they say you're a witness or we just want to talk to you or they say you're a suspect. The only thing you should say is your name and I want a lawyer, and then stop talking. Because they can use every dirty trick imaginable, and they will. And they're allowed to lie. Unlike every other Western country, they're allowed to lie to you in the interrogation room, which is how so many false confessions happen. We have a whole series called Wrongful Conviction False Confessions, a podcast, hosted by the amazing Laura Nyrider and Steve Drizzen of Making a Murderer fame. More importantly, the co-directors of the Center for Wrongful Convictions at Northwestern University. What you learn is that approximately 30% of wrongful convictions involve the false confession, right? So DNA proved these people were innocent, but they falsely confessed to the crime. And so when you go into the police station, you must be aware that they're allowed to lie to you, and they will lie to you about that as well. We see case after case where the cop will say, I'm not allowed to lie to you. That's against the law. That's a lie. So they're lying about lying, and then they'll lie about everything else too. They'll say, look, we got your fingerprints on the knife. We found the murder weapon. None of this is true. There's a video of you leaving the apartment. There's a guy next door who says he saw you do it. He was looking through the window. And eventually, we've seen cases where people became so convinced that they actually believed that they were guilty of the crime they did not commit.
It took Charles Erickson over a decade to figure out he didn't actually commit the crime that he was convicted of. Over a decade.
That is so wild to wrap your head around, because these individuals are not incapable of having independent thought. And to have someone of that type of influence so powerfully telling you this and convincing you that you did something horrific to the point where you've believed it, that is incredible.
That's usually more rare to believe that you actually did it. Charles's case is actually a really interesting one. But people will confess to something to get out of there, to just get out. I mean, if you think of the circumstances, I mean, this one woman, horrible case, she's in there sitting in her own blood. She had just given birth and they had taken her into an interrogation room. She didn't have pads or anything to stop the bleeding after just giving birth. She had urinated in her pants and they just kept her sitting there. If you're in a situation like that for 13, 14, 15 hours, you just want to get the hell out of there and stop bleeding and change your pants. And you'll say anything to get out of that.
But by the way, the only thing, I'll say it again, you should say is your name and I want a lawyer. And you should also ask, am I free to go? People don't realize that the answer to that is almost always yes. And you can just leave, but you're boxed into this little room that's all sort of a scripted routine that they use. Good cop, bad cop, the whole thing. It's crazy. The case of Devontae Sanford that we covered recently is one of those cases, a 14-year-old kid who confessed to a quadruple homicide that he couldn't possibly have committed. And by the way, his uncle was a retired homicide detective in Detroit. There was a police chaplain who lived across the street from the murder scene. It was a gruesome murder. Quadruple homicide in a home in Detroit. And this police chaplain lived across the street, heard the gunshots, came out with his own gun, to protect himself, and saw these two adult males running away. And he presented, this evidence. Nothing this kid said matched the evidence of the crime, but he was forced to confess anyway. And get this. So he's convicted and sentenced to 37 years in prison. And 2 weeks after he's convicted, an actual hitman named Vincent Smothers, great fucking name, right? Vincent Smothers is arrested for 8 other murders, and he comes clean. And he's like, look, that other murder over on whatever street it was on, call it, Oxford Street, whatever street it was. I don't know what street it was on. That quadruple murder, he goes, that was me. Here's who I did it with. Here's where the guns are. The guns were exactly where he said they were. They were exactly the guns they were looking for. Unlike all the other stuff that the other kid had said, none of which matched the actual crime scene. Here's what conversation I had with the one surviving adult who was shot twice, which matched everything she had said. It all added up. And you know what they did? They buried it. They made sure that information didn't get to the defense, and they kept this kid in. It took 10 years for him to be freed. Devontae Sanford and Vincent Smothers. He says on the show, a hitman saved my life. I mean, what a story, right? The cops framed him, and a hitman freed him. It's incredible. I mean, then what does that say? What kind of does it say about the morality of the whole system, where a hitman, right? A guy who killed at least a dozen people had more ethics than the police and prosecutors who fought to convict this kid and then to keep him in prison in spite of overwhelming evidence of his actual innocence.
When you just said, like, what does it say about a hitman having more of a moral compass than the people who are supposed to be doing the right thing, he's able to make that delineation in his head. Like, I'm doing this hit as a job. So I don't know what my point is in all this, but how can he make that distinction, and the people who should be making that distinction can't
or won't?
Yeah.
They protect these wrongful convictions at all costs, and that's a sad statement of the whole system. It's bad enough that they happen, but it's maybe even worse that they are after they're shown, just like Leo Schofield in Bone Valley. After it's shown, you made a mistake. Like, whatever the reasons were, you made a mistake. And it's like, nope, we're good with the mistake. We like the mistake the way it is. We're just going to keep this poor son of a bitch in prison for the rest of his life, or execute them in some cases too, even though we know they're innocent.
I just have one more question. I just want to address the rumors out there that Jason is beside himself with jealousy over Maggie's Pulitzer. So is this an actual fact? The rumors are rampant.
I was, but I've resigned myself to the fact that I'm the only one on my podcast network that doesn't have a Pulitzer. So, you know what I mean?
He's got every other award. He's probably up for the Nobel one of these days, but just the Pulitzer.
Yeah, no, I'm really proud of her. If I get one day, it'll be a thrill of a lifetime. But that's not why I'm doing this work. I'm doing it because of people like Paul Cortez, and because I would hope, that if the roles were reversed, that somebody would be out there. If one of us was in there, we would want somebody like us to be out here doing something like this, to not let them just languish in obscurity and in suffering that is, again, like unimaginable. You got to go back to Count of Monte Cristo to find these type of conditions that exist in some of these prisons. So yeah, that's why we do it. Mm-hmm. And then if anyone in the Pulitzer committee is listening, I really would look great on my mantelpiece. Just saying. We have actually succeeded, though. I heard indirectly from a legendary defense lawyer this week, that it was Ron Kuby, who said that, this is, I'm completely paraphrasing because it's a game of telephone, right? It was somebody to somebody else. And I think it was Ron, but if it wasn't you, Ron, then forgive me if you're listening. But that, we have created the definitive sort of audio archive of these wrongful conviction cases. And we're just going to keep doing it. We're going to keep doing this. And as long as I have a brain cell left in my head and a microphone that someone puts in front of me, we're just going to keep telling these stories and hopefully be a part of fixing this system that so badly needs fixing.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, both of you. We really appreciate your time and all of your work.
You guys, this is the first time we've talked about something other than a disappearance case. That's really interesting. Thanks for having us on.
And follow us if you would like to. First of all, most importantly, follow the podcast. Following me or Maggie is the second most important thing. But follow us at It's Jason Flom, ITSJASONFLOM, and Maggie is at Maggie Freleng because she's the one and only.
There are no others.
Ain't that the truth? Well, thank you both so much. We really appreciate chatting with you.
Thank you, guys.